The clink of silverware against porcelain felt impossibly loud in the sudden silence that descended upon the dining room. It was a silence that amplified the subtle rustle of linen, the soft intake of breath from across the table, and most acutely, the beating of my own heart against my ribs. I could feel every eye on me, not with the warmth of genuine curiosity, but with a sort of practiced dismissal, a collective exhalation of disinterest that felt almost physically palpable. David, my brother-in-law, was mid-sentence, his voice laced with that particular brand of condescending joviality he reserved for people he considered beneath him, for those whose very existence served as a foil to his own perceived brilliance. And then, of course, Liam, he continued, his tone dripping with mock sympathy. You wouldn't understand the intricacies of this market. It's rather specialized, you see. Demands a certain acumen. He glanced at his wife, my sister Sarah, who offered a tight, almost imperceptible nod, her gaze fixed somewhere over my shoulder, on the ornate molding of the ceiling, anywhere but on me. It was a calculated move, a carefully orchestrated moment, rehearsed perhaps in the mirror of their shared ambition, designed with surgical precision to highlight my perceived inadequacy, to make me small, insignificant, a mere shadow in the gilded frame of their lives, in front of the very people I'd once considered family, the pillars of my childhood world. The dinner itself had been a minefield from the moment I arrived, each step fraught with unspoken judgments and carefully worded barbs. My mother-in-law, a woman who prided herself on her social acumen, her ability to navigate the treacherous currents of polite society with an almost predatory grace, had spent the first hour subtly inquiring about my career progression. Each question, delivered with a saccharine smile, was a thinly veiled judgment, a meticulously crafted probe designed to uncover any perceived deficiency. "Oh, still in that same junior role, Liam?" she'd asked, her voice a silken whisper that nonetheless cut through the air. "How steady? It's good to have stability, I suppose." My father-in-law, a man of few words but potent, often gruff, opinions, had merely grunted in response to my tentative attempts at conversation, his silence a heavy cloak of disapproval, a judgment rendered without utterance. But David, always the ringleader of my humiliation, the maestro of my discomfort, had saved the best for last, a crescendo of condescension just as the main course, a rich, complex dish I hadn't truly tasted, was being cleared. The unspoken implication, the shared, unspoken agreement that hung heavy and suffocating in the air, was clear. I was a failure, a perpetual outsider, someone whose presence at their table was tolerated rather than welcomed, a stray thread in the meticulously woven tapestry of their lives. The air grew thick with that collective judgment, a palpable weight that pressed down on me. I excused myself to the restroom, the polite smiles of my hosts, each one a carefully practiced facade, feeling like thinly veiled sneers, designed to mock my attempt to escape their scrutiny. Back in the sterile quiet of my hotel room later that night, the sting of the evening's events hadn't faded. It had settled deep within me, a dull ache that radiated through my chest. It was the casual cruelty that hurt the most, the almost unconscious way they inflicted pain, as if it were merely a natural consequence of my own shortcomings. The way Sarah, my own sister, had remained silent, a silent, complicit observer in their subtle digs, their carefully aimed barbs. We'd always been close, or so I thought, bound by shared childhood memories, whispered secrets under starlit skies. But marriage and the subtle, insidious influence of her new family, their values, their ambitions, their worldview, had built a wall between us, brick by invisible brick, a barrier I hadn't even realized was being erected until it was too high to see over. David's world was one of high finance, of sharp suits and sharper tongues, a relentless pursuit of power and status. He thrived on asserting dominance, on elevating himself by diminishing others, and I, with my quieter life, my less ostentatious career, my preference for substance over show, was an easy target, a convenient foil. I replayed the evening in my mind, a relentless loop of the patronizing tone, the knowing glances that passed between them, the suffocating weight of their collective judgment. It wasn't just about that one dinner, that singular performance of disdain. It was a pattern, a consistent, relentless undercurrent of disrespect that had been building for years, a slow erosion of my self-worth. I felt a familiar ache, the dull throb of being underestimated, of being overlooked, of being perpetually on the outside looking in. The next morning dawned gray and uninspired, much like my mood. The city outside my window seemed to mirror the internal landscape of my own despondency. I was in town for a conference, a rare occasion that brought me into their orbit, a geographical necessity that always felt like a deliberate imposition. My flight home wasn't until late afternoon, leaving me with several hours to kill. A void I usually filled with solitary exploration of the city's hidden corners or the quiet anonymity of a bustling coffee shop. But this time something felt different. The gnawing frustration, the raw sting of their words, had begun to settle, to coalesce into something more substantial. The gnawing frustration had settled into a quiet resolve, a stillness that was more potent than any outward display of anger. It wasn't about winning an argument, not about demanding an apology that would likely never come. It was about recalibrating the dynamic, about ensuring this level of casual disrespect, this habitual underestimation, wouldn't be a recurring feature of my life, wouldn't be a given in any future encounter. It was about reclaiming a piece of the dignity they had so carelessly chipped away at piece by insidious piece. I knew my sister's husband, David, was part of a local chapter of a professional organization. He often boasted about his connections, his leadership roles within the group, his influence among its members. It was a source of considerable pride for him, a badge of honor he wore with an almost arrogant flourish. He'd even mentioned, with a self-important smirk that I now recalled with a renewed sense of clarity, that their chapter was particularly exclusive, comprised of influential figures in their respective fields, the movers and shakers of the city's elite. It struck me then, a quiet spark igniting in the dull ache of the night before. A possibility, a subtle avenue I hadn't considered. I had a contact, someone I'd worked with on a past project, a man I'd respected for his integrity and competence, who was a fairly senior figure in the National Oversight Committee for this exact organization. A man who, crucially, respected me, not for my social standing or my perceived influence, but for the quality of my work and my quiet dedication. I found a quiet cafe on a less traffic street, ordered a black coffee, strong and unsweetened, and pulled out my phone, the cool metal a grounding sensation in my palm. I debated for a moment, the words forming and reforming in my mind, searching for the right tone, the right approach. Then with a deep breath I dialed the number. "Mark? Liam here. I hope I'm not catching you at a bad time." I began, my voice carefully pitched to convey a sense of professional courtesy, nothing more. I explained my situation vaguely, framing it as an inquiry about professional ethics and the general conduct expected within affiliated chapters of the organization. I spoke of a recent social gathering, a dinner hosted by a relative, where I'd felt some members had displayed a concerning lack of professionalism and respect, particularly one individual who seemed to be using their affiliation to belittle others, to assert a sense of superiority. I didn't name names, not yet. The power lay in the implication, in allowing Mark to connect the dots himself if he chose to. I simply laid out the scenario, emphasizing the inappropriate behavior and the impact it had on me as a guest, as someone present in a social capacity. Mark listened patiently, his usual pragmatic tone, devoid of any histrionics, a reassuring counterpoint to my lingering anxiety. He asked a few clarifying questions, his focus entirely on the principles involved, on the ethical framework of the organization. He assured me that such behavior was indeed contrary to the organization's code of conduct, and that he would look into it personally. He mentioned, almost as an aside, that he was actually scheduled to attend a regional chapter meeting in the city that very week, a detail that made my heart give a small, almost imperceptible leap of hope. The rest of the day was spent in a state of quiet anticipation, a low hum of nervous energy beneath the surface of my conference participation. I reread emails from the conference sessions, trying to appear engaged, to absorb the information, but my mind kept returning to the cafe conversation, to the implications of my brief call. I imagined David's bluster, his pronouncements about his importance within the organization, his assumed authority within that particular chapter. I imagined the network of people he surrounded himself with, all likely adhering to his unspoken rules of superiority, his condescending worldview. The idea wasn't to expose him to the world, not to orchestrate a public spectacle of his flaws. The goal was far more subtle, to subtly shift the perception of him among the very people he held in such high regard, to introduce a seed of doubt, a question mark where there had previously been unquestioning deference. The following evening, as I sat in the departure lounge waiting for my flight, I received a brief, cordial email from Mark. It was concise, professional, and precisely what I had hoped for. He simply stated that he had attended the regional chapter meeting as planned, and had a chance to speak with the chapter president. He mentioned that he'd brought up my concerns, framing them as a general observation about fostering a more welcoming environment, and as a result, he wrote, "There's been a slight adjustment in how certain social events are being organized moving forward, focusing more on inclusivity and mutual respect." He added, almost as an afterthought, that he was glad he could be of assistance. There was no mention of David by name, no accusation, just a quiet statement of fact, a subtle nudge in the right direction. A week later Sarah called. Her voice was strained, a far cry from her usual cheerful, effervescent tone. There was a tension in her words, a hesitant quality that immediately put me on alert. "Liam, have you spoken to David recently?" she asked, her words clipped, almost rushed. I told her I hadn't, and there was a pause, a rustling sound on her end, as if she were shifting uncomfortably. He's a bit upset," she finally managed, her voice lower now, as if sharing a confidence. "He said something about a meeting he attended after you were in town. Apparently, some changes are being made within his chapter." He seemed quite rattled. She wouldn't elaborate, her reluctance to delve deeper evident, and I didn't press. The hint of discomfort in her voice, the implication that her husband, the formidable David, had been genuinely unsettled, was enough. The quiet satisfaction of that knowledge settled deep within me. A few weeks after that, I saw David at a family event, a summer barbecue at my parents' home. The usual swagger was absent. The confident stride was replaced by a more hesitant gait. He avoided my gaze, his smile, when it flickered in my direction, was a tight, almost pained expression, a contortion of his face rather than a genuine display of warmth. When I approached him intending to offer a polite greeting, he offered a curt nod, his eyes darting away. "Liam," he said, his voice lacking its usual booming confidence, the resonance that always seemed to fill every room he entered. He quickly turned to speak to someone else, a hurried retreat, a palpable desire to disengage from our interaction. My mother-in-law, who had always treated me with a distant, almost perfunctory politeness, suddenly found me fascinating, her questions now tinged with a new, albeit superficial, curiosity, as if seeing me for the first time. My father-in-law, a man rarely prone to displays of warmth, even managed a brief, almost imperceptible nod in my direction as he passed by, a gesture that, from him, held the weight of a commendation. The social landscape had subtly, irrevocably shifted. The air of dismissal, of inherent superiority, had been replaced by a cautious respect, or at least a newfound wariness, a subtle acknowledgement that perhaps I was not quite as insignificant as they had once believed. It wasn't about revenge, not in the fiery, dramatic sense. It was about a quiet correction, a subtle realignment of power achieved not through confrontation, not through overt defiance, but through the precise placement of a carefully considered truth. They had attempted to diminish me, to render me invisible, and in doing so they had revealed their own vulnerabilities, their own insecurities, to the very people whose opinions they valued most. The quiet satisfaction of that knowledge settled deep within me, a cool, clean absence of the bitterness that had festered for so long. It was the quiet triumph of understanding that sometimes, the most powerful statements are not spoken aloud, but are woven into the fabric of perception, influencing the currents of power in ways both subtle and profound.